God has given all of us a mission to make disciples here and everywhere for the glory of God.
Minus 10, 9.
We want our church to be a launch pad for sending people out on the mission God has for them. Regardless of who you are, we all have a role to play. We are all involved in God's story. We pray that the story shared through Mission Control will encourage you to see how God is calling you to be used by Him. Hello, my name is Amanda Levy, and I'm the Communications Director here at First Baptist Melbourne and the host of this podcast. And today, we have Darren Wolfe joining us. Finally, I've been trying to get him on the schedule for a while. Darren is our administrative pastor. Is that your technical title?
I think so, yes.
He's the administrative pastor here at First Baptist Melbourne. He's also my boss, so no pressure. But he's a great boss. And so he has an interesting story in how, or I think it's interesting, how you came from engineer to here, but I'm not going to steal your thunder.
Okay.
Before we get into all of that,
All right.
though, thought we could do a fun space-themed icebreaker question.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, we already talked about this before we started recording. Don't let them fool you. But if you could swap places with any character from a space-related movie for a day, who would it be and why?
Ooh, see, those are good. So first, the life group that I'm part of always picks on me because I start with an icebreaker.
Okay.
And they always groan when I
So
start.
this is comfortable for you.
Well, now I'm on the other side of it.
You
so
stopped doing the icebreaker questions in our support meetings, though.
I did. I think from the threat of mutiny, I stopped the icebreakers. But I do like the ideas of icebreakers. And so just to get my thoughts going, the question was, if I was a space-related or space movie character.
If you could swap places with any character from a space-related movie for a day, who would it be and why? And you get to decide what counts as a space-related movie.
So I think the character I would swap with is R2-D2 from Star Wars. And the reason why is each movie, he gets more and more abilities, which I think is pretty neat. So he starts off as just a little bot, but by the end of the last movie, he could fly, he could do amazing things. So as he ages, he gets better. So I'm hoping that's available to me. So that'd be my goal, is to...
Now, okay, I'm showing my cards that I'm not super familiar with Star Wars. So were they smart enough to start him in episode 4 and then regress him 1 through 3 and then progress from 4 to 7?
It's been a long time since I've seen the first ones because my kids are older now, but I'm pretty sure he showed up in almost all of them.
Okay.
So, yes.
Cool. Star Wars. It's a good go-to.
Agreed.
Well, as much fun as it is to talk about space,
yeah.
thought we'd talk about your space. So where does God currently have you on mission right now?
So I am on mission as a husband and dad, first of all, in my home. So I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 24 years. And so we got married in the year 2000, which makes it easy for me to remember.
That's good math.
Yes, I think Amy was setting me up for success there. And then I'm a dad, 4 kids. I've got my oldest is entering her second year of college at UCF. And so I know Amanda is a fellow knight like me. And so we're proud of that. She's doing great. And then I got 3 boys. And so Connor's a junior in high school, which is just crazy to think.
Yeah.
Zach is in 8th grade, and Nate, the spice of our family, is in 5th grade this year. And so that's the first place I'm on mission, is at home. And then also been the administrative pastor here for 8 years and loving it. So the Lord's been very gracious to me to allow me to get into this role. And but prior to that, I was, I guess we'll get into my story later. So right now, on mission here, and we just wrapped up a pretty large project at the church. I was blessed to be able to take a couple weeks off on my first ever sabbatical.
Yeah.
And so I had a chance to kind of recharge the batteries. And so this is a neat thing to come back to do this podcast. And also, now that project's done, rejoined a life group. And so absolutely love.
Rejoined or you lead?
What's that?
Do you lead?
Lead is a strong term. We all know each other so well. We're all good friends.
You started it, though.
Yeah. I say the icebreaker at the beginning, so that's a...
There you go. Hey, it's something.
That's right.
Someone has to start it. So what does one do as an administrative pastor?
That's a great question. Every day seems different.
Is it just other duties as assigned?
I think so when I first got on board, Scott explained it to me as, hey, if it's not preaching, if it's not kids, if it's not music, and it's not Sunday school, you probably get to handle it. And I thought at the time, that doesn't sound like a lot, so I could do that. And then I've discovered since then, it does seem to be a lot, but it's a good a lot.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so things like anything that's behind the scenes, which I absolutely love. And so my unofficial title is the world's ugliest cheerleader for all of the pastors here. And so my job is to support their ministries. So if there's any roadblocks they have, is to get them the resources they need, to encourage them, to just make sure that they have what they need to do what God has called them to do. And so that goes from everything from working with great folks like Mike Allman and Michael Harold on the facilities, to finance, to HR, to help run meetings, plan things out. So it's just a great role. I joke it's the best job around because I get a front row seat to everybody else's ministries. And so I get to kind of witness what everybody does. It's just super cool.
Did you already establish how long you've been the administrative pastor here?
So I have been the administrative pastor here 8 years.
Okay.
And so I feel like 7 of those 8 years were building project years. So I don't know if it's like dog years where that counts as more, but yeah, 8 years.
I think we could count it as more.
That
was a big project. So prior to that, you were not in ministry. So let's talk about that a little bit. What did that journey look like for you?
Well, I'm going to throw you a curveball. I heard in your intro, I worked at Harris. I was not an engineer. And so my background is
I didn't even say that in my intro.
Yeah, so I think you'd said something about...
did I say engineering? I don't know. I said whatever.
So
Harris and engineering are like one and the same.
Well, I was surrounded by engineers. I was one of the few non-engineers there. I was in the finance group at Harris. And so got a job offer with Uncle Harris, as we call it, right out of college, and moved out here to Melbourne.
Oh, so you had been at Harris your entire career prior to...
I was there for 17 years.
Wow.
That shows you how old I am. But
I'm not doing the math.
Yeah.
Other people might.
But one of the neat things that the Lord blessed me with Harris was pretty early in my career there, I was able to go into a program where Harris moved me and Amy around. And so we grew up in a small town. Didn't travel much.
Here, right?
No, Jupiter, Florida. And so Amy's actually from Palatka, Florida.
Oh.
And so when she gets mad at me, you'll hear her accent every once in a while. But she moved to Jupiter in middle school.
Okay.
And that's where we met.
Okay.
And then both from very down-to-earth, blue-collar families. Didn't do much traveling. Went off to UCF together. Got married right after UCF. Got a job offer with Uncle Harris. Moved out to Melbourne. Loved it. But about 5 years in, they put us in a program where they moved us all over the country. And so really cool, very flattering. Got a chance to work with some great people. But neither one of us had traveled much as kids.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but got a chance to, spend some time in New York, Colorado, overseas a little bit, the UK. Came back home for a little bit. And then they moved us to Canada. It was for 2.5 years. Amy would say it's 3 winters, but it was 2.5 years. And then came back here, and then was back here for probably, 4 or 5 years before coming on staff at the church. And there's a lot of details in there, but through that, all those roles were different, working in different divisions, doing different things, and loved it. Loved the people at Harris. Absolutely loved my time there. Would not have left unless there was a clear calling to leave. And I think it took a clear calling to get me out of there because I think very highly of the people who are still there at Harris.
So at what point did God start stirring in your heart for that clear calling?
That's a good question. So it took me a while. I'm a little bit hard-headed. And also, I didn't come to faith till later. So Amy grew up in a Christian household, was in church since the moment she was born. My family would go on Christmas and Easter. So really never heard the gospel or understood the gospel until I started dating Amy. And so Amy said, hey, if you're going to go with me to the movies on Saturday, you got to come with me to church on Sunday. And so junior year in high school, started attending a small church in Jupiter called Beacon Baptist, and heard the gospel there. And I think I drove the pastor crazy because it was into every service, close your eyes, bow your head, gives the invitation, raise your hand. I think I raised my hand probably for 3 months in a row, but never came forward.
Gotcha.
And so he just grabbed me after the service once, pulled me in his office, and very graciously led me through the sinner's prayer. Understood the gospel there, but didn't realize the impact it had on my life. So
Gotcha.
It wasn't until senior in high school really was when I started to understand what it means to be a Christian, then go off to UCF and didn't really get plugged into a church, and that could be a conversation or encouragement to young people if we get to that part. And so I just kind of moved sideways in my faith.
Uh-huh.
But then when we started at Harris here, me and Amy, when we got married, said, all right, we're going to get involved in a church.
Okay.
And so local church here, our second Sunday visiting was the youth pastor, the new youth pastor at the church's first Sunday. He saw us in the lobby and said, hey, do you guys have kids? And we said, no. I said, well, good. You're now youth counselors. And really spent about 4 or 5 years working in the youth department. And just to encourage the listeners, I tell you, there's nothing like working in youth ministry where you get to see God move in young people's hearts.
Mm-hmm.
When the light bulb goes off, it's just neat to be around that.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know at the time, but the youth pastor, who's Jeff Smith, who's now out in Oklahoma, was discipling me. And so that was the first time really involved in ministry and liked it, loved it. And then would have done that forever. But then the Lord called Jeff out to Oklahoma. By that time is when me and Amy started moving. And so we left this environment where we loved working with young people. We loved seeing the Lord move. But we were very used to a certain type of church. And so where I heard the gospel was an independent Baptist church. Where I was serving here was an independent Baptist church. And then when we moved around, we got plugged into different types of churches. And it was just neat for the Lord to open our eyes to different ministry models.
Mm-hmm.
I could think of each stop we had, it was like the Lord showed us something. We went to New York. We were actually in upstate New York. And the church there was very missional. And so how to reach the community, because there wasn't a lot of believers in that area. And so being able to see that, experience that. Then we went to a church plant in Denver, and just to be a part of church that you have to set up chairs every Sunday was very cool.
Set up and tear down.
And then going out to the UK and being part of in your mind that the church is across the globe, but when you experience it, it's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the Lord would just open our eyes to, hey, you liked working with kids. Here's how big the church is. And to experience that, we're like, all right, I think that solidified for us, being involved in church, because everywhere we went, we got plugged in, and that made a world of difference. Made friends in all those places.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's the program I was in, there was a couple other people in the program. We were all rotating to different stops.
Gotcha.
It was neat to see some of them had a hard time getting to know folks or getting plugged in, but we immediately had friends everywhere we went.
Yeah. What was the longest you stayed in one spot?
So the Toronto stop was at
the 3 winters.
3 winters.
What was the shortest amount?
6 months.
Oh, okay, so yeah, it's pretty short.
Long. But all that just showed us that we were church life was for us. And then when we came back here, got involved. We led one of the first life groups and loved it. And just seeing
you got involved here at First Baptist Melbourne?
So okay. Scott had just become the young adults pastor.
Gotcha.
And he was starting life groups. So I remember going to Moe's, which I think had just opened at that time.
Oh, okay.
Having lunch with Scott, talking about the importance of groups. And so we started one. And just doing life with people. I know that's cliche, but it's true. It's neat.
Yeah.
When it's just you only see what the Lord does in your life. When you have deep friends who are praying and seeking the Lord, you get to see what he does in their lives. And so you get to experience more of God. And so that just, we're more drawn to serving. And somewhere in there, I was very humbled to be called to be a deacon. Got a chance to be a deacon here. But at the same time, Harris was being very gracious to me and Amy and forcing us up the org chart. And so as you get more responsibilities, you get less time. Mm-hmm. And so I started feeling the tension between, man, I really like serving, really like doing things at the church, but having less and less time to do it. So that started to cause a little tension. So that was when the start of a call on my life. Is okay. I can't. I got to make a choice.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I had to make a choice.
Okay. What year would that have been?
Oh goodness. So that would have been probably the big discontent in a good way.
Yeah.
Came 2015, 2016, somewhere in there.
And then at what point did the job open up here at First Baptist Melbourne?
Oh man, I'll bore. Who knows? I probably only Amy and her mom's the one watching me on this podcast, but
I doubt it.
Well, there's a story there.
Okay.
And so, left this program where they put us all over the country. Got to work at Harris. Probably got promoted over my head. Was doing a job I probably didn't have any business doing. And then instead of celebrating that, I felt like, oh, something's off. I know I should be happy about this promotion. Yeah. And then Harris at that point made it one of its largest. It was the largest acquisition they had made at that point. And so they pulled me out of my job and then put me on the integration team, which again should have been flattering, but it was just like, instead of excited, this is going to take more time away from the church.
Yeah.
And got a chance to do that. And, I did like what I did at Harris.
Mm-hmm.
As I wrapped that up, they were going to put me in another role, which would have been the first really large promotion. I just remember thinking, instead of excited, I feel like this is a trap.
Mm.
And talked about it with Amy and said, hey, this is, the type of life-changing type career change. And we were, we again grew up in blue-collar families. We had no clue what that meant. But instead of being excited, just this discontent. So Amy says to me, well, you need to go talk with the pastor. And in my mind, you only go talk with the pastor if something bad is happening.
Yeah.
And so, but just was unsettled. Instead of celebrating, just feeling off. And so I set up a time to go talk with Scott. And so me and Amy met with Scott. And so Scott was asking, well, if you were on a church staff, what role would you do? And I said, anything but singing, because if anybody sits near me in church, they know I am not a singer. But would love to help wherever I could. And so Amy kind of whispers to Scott, well, he would do what Mitch does. So Mitch is a good friend, and he was the administrative pastor here for a short season before I was. And Scott said, okay, that's interesting. And they took a note, and we went on to talk about what it means to feel a calling.
Mm-hmm.
So me and Amy left that meeting thinking, all right, we'll prepare ourselves so that 3 or 4 years from now, if a call comes, we'll be ready to go.
Sure.
And so, and we were serious about that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Lord, we'll be ready when you call us.
Mm-hmm.
A month later, Scott gets up on a Sunday morning and says, hey, Mitch has an announcement. Mitch stands up, announces that the Lord's calling him back to the corporate world. Mm-hmm. There's some people that he needed to share with, and he felt he had a bigger audience to share the gospel there. And so me and Amy weren't sitting together because we were serving in different areas. After the church, we just stared at each other and said, what? And so I remember calling.
Was that like the very next Sunday or just really
It was about
close?
4 Sundays after
but still really fresh and close.
But that's part of the story.
Okay.
So I called Scott and said, hey, should I come talk to you again? He said, please do. And so in that meeting, he shared the night before I met with Scott was when Mitch had come to him and said he's feeling the call to go back into the corporate world to share with people. And so it's neat to, as you look back, to see how the Lord has lined things up. And so the night before I talked with Scott, Mitch shares with Scott that he needs to step down. And then one of the biggest mistakes our personnel committee has ever done, they recommended me for the position here 8 years ago, and I've absolutely loved it. And so
awesome.
So that's boy, that was a long story.
I probably it's a great story.
Amy and her mom at this point.
Stories like that where like the timing just makes it so obvious that God was in it. I think they're great to share. I think we should share more often. Yeah,
and it's I think all of us as believers have these, anchor points in our lives where God shows up, and just grace upon grace that as Harris was promoting me, instead of being excited about it, the Lord planted discontent in my heart, which led me to a conversation that opened these doors. And just encourage everybody, just make your mind up. Say yes, and then go through whatever door opens.
Yeah. So, in your mind, what did you think ministry would look like? And what has ministry actually looked like?
Well, I think one of the blessings that I had is we had gotten really involved in a lot of areas in all the churches we served. So we had seen behind the curtain before.
Yeah.
And we also have some family members who are in ministry. And I actually find it an encouragement when you run into those people who, there's some difficult things to ministry, who serve with joy despite those difficulties. And so there wasn't too many shocks in terms of what the role entails. I think more of the shocks came in the blessings that I'd run into. So many times it's happened where there's some big decision we're trying to make or something that working through, and then a member will shoot you a text, or some sweet lady will stop you in the hallway and say that she's been praying for you. Those are the shocking things, is that the Lord really does put the right messages and people in your lives at the right time. And I've seen over the 8 years things that we could have never done in our own power, but the Lord has coincident, these things that just line up and it happens.
Yeah.
So those have been the shocks of just, I think when you really try to serve and work for the kingdom, you get an opportunity to see the Lord move. And that's just so cool.
Yeah. So you mentioned, most people know, we just finished a big building project. Yeah. What are some ways that God showed up in the middle of that?
Oh, goodness. Oh, man, there's so many. I joke, this is a bad analogy, and it's probably heretical, so
take it with a grain of salt.
Yes. But somewhere up in heaven, there's the HR angel who knows the right person who has the right skill set, and he's moving those people around. And so things from like Mike Weems showing up at our church right before we start on the building project, and he has a construction background and roofing, to Brian Lemons, who his dad's an architect, so he knows how to read drawings very well, and is also very detail oriented, to Janice, who has served and kept everybody on path. Just in the building project, I think him bringing the right people, the right moment. And so tons of those stories. I think if I could share just one small story that encapsulates the whole thing. So the final touches of decorations in the building turned out amazing. And our plan was me and Brian Lemons, who Brian's great, but we both have a flaw. We're just going to look through a magazine.
I remember this. And
pick out some greenery, maybe a couple chairs, and that was going to be our interior decorating. Through the Lord lining up some things, Lex and Ashley Chotai came across our path. And the way the building looks now, because their fingerprints are all over it, versus the way it looked if it was me and Brian and a couple people on the committee, are night and day. And tell you, their touches has made it a welcoming space and allows the function of the building to do what it needs to do. And so take that example and multiply it by 100. And that's been the coolest thing about the building project. Him putting the right people in the right spot at just the right time to make things happen. And now that we're done, even the delays, so we had quite a few delays, but
just one or two.
Yeah. But things like we locked in our loan at the very bottom of interest rates. We locked in our material costs right before inflation took off. Like if you look back, there were some key things that made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I would attribute to throughout the building project, our people have been praying. We've been talking about this building. The goal isn't to build a building. The goal is to have a tool to reach people. And I think the Lord in some ways honored that spirit, and he's allowed us to maximize a lot of things that we wouldn't have if we were rushing or trying to push for certain things. I'm rambling. I'm so sorry. But
You're not rambling.
Okay.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think as we move away from the building, what excites you about the next season of ministry? Building is done.
Oh man,
There was so much of your ministry so far that's just been building.
Yeah, I would say the part of my role that I love is helping build teams. And so while I oversee a lot of functions, I think the most important thing is getting the right people in the right spot and helping them get pointed in the right direction. And then, so I'm most excited about, you start seeing where some of our teams, and I say team, not just church employees, but the church. The church is the people, not the staff. And you just see who is in our church, what is happening. You know, like I said, I've got the coolest job because I get to see
it.
Oh, yeah, and it's everywhere. Like from a listener to this podcast, hey, start paying attention to who you're seeing in the lobby. You're going to see lots of fostering going on in the church right now. So you're seeing adoptions happening. You're seeing these new outreach ministries. You're seeing people on the edge of society be welcomed in. I think those are symptoms of when God's Spirit moves. His heart is for the people who are on the edge of society. And so when they start showing up, you know his Spirit's moving. And that HR angel is bringing people in the right spot. And just seeing that happen all over the place is really, really cool. And so that's what I'm most excited about, is that a lot has happened in the last 7 years, but I think it's just the start of what is going to happen. You know, God's on the move. He has been for since time began, and he's continuing to move, and we're getting to see it. So,
what advice would you have for someone who's trying to discern what God is calling them to do?
Oh, that's good.
It's a loaded one.
No. So in no particular order.
Okay.
So one, let me say the cliche and then try to explain it.
Okay.
First, you got to stay close to the Lord. And what does that mean? So practically, prayer is a real thing, and you need to be praying. You need to be in the Word. You need to have spiritual disciplines. The idea of, hey, if you're filling your mind with trash, and if you're pursuing non-noble things, you're probably not going to hear from the Lord on what your next step is. And so one is to prepare yourself and put yourself in a place to where you're open. And then I also say be fearless. So the idea of put your yes on the table first, and then whatever comes, pursue it. And so stay close to the Lord so you could hear him. And then in my experience, all right, so Amanda knows that I am a very visual person.
I know I should have brought in a whiteboard for you.
So I've always, in my personal walk, I've discovered if I think about the future, or was the Lord calling me to do way out there, not much happens.
Okay.
But ironically, if I think about, all right, what does the Lord put in front of me right now?
Yeah.
And if I'm faithful there, all of a sudden those big things start happening.
Yeah. And
so I think being faithful for the little things that are in front of you now, but being willing to pursue the big things when those doors open. You know, so if someone's feeling a call, I'd say you're going to hear from the Lord through prayer and his word. So make sure you're praying and reading his word. You're going to hear from him through his people as well. If you believe that God's Spirit is in his children, which I believe that, then he's going to use people with the Holy Spirit in them to speak to you. And so surround yourself with people who are pursuing God as well, and invite them to speak into your life. I think if you're feeling a call, there's probably going to be people, other believers around you who's going to confirm that call. And then don't let day-to-day things keep you from pursuing it. So if you don't think God's big enough to overcome the day-to-day barriers you're going to have, then you're probably not going to be faithful enough to be given something.
The big opportunity,
Correct.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I've discovered is that since coming into full-time ministry, because we're all in ministry, but vocational ministry, I've had lots of conversations with guys my age who are experiencing lack of purpose or loneliness. And one of the things I try to work in the conversations on, hey, if you're feeling the Lord call you to something, you need to plan, but the spreadsheet is never going to close.
Yeah.
There is going to be some element of faith that you need to step out and do it. And so plan the best you can, but if the Lord's calling you, he'll equip you and you need to do it. So, if you were to summarize, hey, be close to the Lord, reading his word and praying, be surrounded by people. And then when you get the opportunity, take it. And it's going to require a little bit of a jump in faith.
Yeah.
So,
what are some influences that have been encouraging for you on this journey?
Oh, man.
That could be a book, a person.
Oh, man. There's so many.
It doesn't have to be the best, just one of.
I think God's people. And so, we recently went through whenever you get a setback or something that's a hard thing to get through. I remember before a meeting where we had to share some bad news, 3 of the sweet ladies who, I don't know why, but they've always just been an encouragement to me, pulled me aside and hugged me right before I had to present something that was less than ideal. And so, the Lord used them in that moment. And so he knows when to have those people say the right things at the right time. So I'd say his people. The other thing is we're very blessed here to whoever's preaching on a Sunday, and most times it's Scott, is you're going to hear truth. And so just having your life, walking out on a Sunday morning, I was just reminded of an eternal truth. It's just something that's maintained me. So I'd say his people and the way the Lord kind of leads them to encourage you at the right moment. And then just being attached to a church that's proclaiming truth and knowing that you're part of something that is meaningful. Let me pause there because I'll keep rambling.
You mentioned earlier, I feel like this is a good segue, when you're talking about college, you were a new believer and you didn't really get connected with the church. And you were like, if it comes up, encouragement for younger adults.
Yes. When I was in college, I kind of drifted. And so what would be advice? So I had 2 pieces of advice. So one, for a college student, get involved in a local church. And so it's good to have a home church, but wherever you're at, you need to be in a church. And that means don't just attend, but attending is a victory.
Yeah.
I remember my college days, just attending on a Sunday would be a victory.
Yeah.
And if you could go beyond that, if you could serve somewhere, that's bonus points. And because then you'll get exposed to, all right, this is church life. I think my other encouragement would be to non-college age believers. I had no role models in my immediate circle. And so without a good role model or a man telling me, hey, here's a godly pursuit, my background was, all right, dad drove a truck, mom taught middle school math. I went to UCF, worried about money, paid my way through. I studied finance and economics because I was worried about money. And so my focus was, all right, how do I support myself? I knew I wanted to marry Amy at that point.
Yeah.
How do I be a provider? So my goals were good goals, but they were worldly goals.
Yeah.
Man, if I had someone who was encouraging me at the age of 20, 21, things that I know now, hey, the Lord's going to provide for you.
Yeah.
Pursue him.
Yeah.
And just being someone to speak into my life back then.
Yeah.
The Lord used all things in my life to get me to where I am, and he's in control. But I probably spent 5 or 6 years drifting when if I had a good mentor who just would say, hey, Darren, it's good to be a good provider, but that's a start. You really need to be someone who leads your family well, who pursues Christ. And here are the things that you need to be pursuing. That would have made a huge difference.
Yeah. So
my advice would be, if you are a college student, attend a local church, serve. And if you're not a college student, if you're older and a believer, hey, find a college young person, speak into their life, encourage them.
I think it's cool that not that your focus is here, but I think it's cool how God used that focus, and then that's what he flipped on its head.
Oh.
So you were so worried about being a good provider. You got this phenomenal job that was more than providing, and yet you weren't satisfied. And so I think it's interesting to hear how that's a consistent thing of God.
Well, and we'll probably cut this.
Okay.
If I give you the full story, when I told my boss...
I was actually going to ask,
okay,
what did your boss respond with?
So, he was shocked.
Yeah.
So, at a certain level, they're used to people leaving for better paying jobs. I had gotten trained in a very particular area in the defense contracting industry that there was a demand for it. And so...
Did he throw more money at you?
Yes. And so that's the part that I think, again, this will probably get cut, but I think this is God's grace. So I'd already been promoted over my head. I told him, I think I'm being called to be a pastor. And then I'm laying all my cards on the table. Yeah. So the way the process works is that the personnel committee is recommending me. The church has to vote on me. So the gentleman's name is Rahul, who I love. He's now the CEO at GE. Sorry, the CFO at GE. But he was working on this project with me. And so I'm explaining to him.
The process. Was he a believer?
He was not.
Okay.
And so Rahul was like, well, it's just I love him, great guy. But he goes to bat and then gets the company to offer me a promotion to keep me. So on my way out, they give a counteroffer to become a vice president. I had no business being a director, much less. And so here I am leaving. I think I was 37. And it was almost like the Lord saying, if you're serious about this, you need to walk away from this because I'm calling you to this. And it was just a great anchor point to say, all right, if I'm serious, this is what you're walking away from.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments like so clear that, they're very gracious when they do this. They sit you down with an HR person.
Sure.
It was the chief operating officer, and they laid the folder in front of you.
Yeah.
And I just remember as they're going over it, I'm like, I'm not tempted at all.
That's awesome.
Young Darren, who was 21, 22.
That was young Darren's focus.
Correct. And this was beyond anything he would have even imagined.
Correct.
And to know that, not even tempted. And so, and then Amy too, just, all right. That's a nice data point.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm being called to do.
Yeah.
And then just to know that I value what I'm doing now. So, and I think the part for them was they'd never experienced that. And so I remember my final department meeting, I basically gave an invitation at the end of it. This is how I'm leaving. This is what I'm going to do. So let me explain it to you guys. And but just absolutely love all those people. But the Lord called me here.
That's awesome. I think it's very similar to Jason Shack's story where he was sharing, because he had a similar moment where he was feeling called to come here. He let that known, and I think it was like on the same night that he got the job offer, he was also nominated Teacher of the Year.
Yes.
So I think it's even more confirming when God's like, when you go through a test or trial like that.
Yes.
You're like, no, this is a journey, and I feel confident in it.
Correct. And the Lord gives you what you need to serve Him well. And those are the moments you kind of look back on and said, and also to know that it does have no appeal to me. For me, it would have been a trap because I would have chased something that in my younger years, that's what I thought I should do. And there would have been no satisfaction there. And then you come here and I tell you, if you work in the preschool hallway to seeing youth.
Which he does, by the way.
But you get to see the Lord move.
Yeah.
And if you really think about important things, like if you get out of all the details, the Lord calling people into His family, His kingdom expanding, why would you pursue anything else?
Yeah.
And that's the part that the grace to anchor that home for me. Yeah.
Right. And finally, what advice would you have for someone who's seeking to answer the call to make disciples here and everywhere for the glory of God?
That's good. Good.
It's almost like it's our mission
I
statement
know.
or something.
I'm convinced more than ever it's about relationships
Uh-huh.
and being willing to use those relationships in a good way. Meaning, if you're friends with someone, hey, it's good to give them encouragement. It's good to help them. But if you withhold from them the thing that'll bring them the most joy, the most purpose, and make an eternal difference, you're not really a good friend. And so using your relationships to truly share who God is. You know, we're not all called to be theologians. We're not all called to be musicians, thank goodness for my case. But we are all called to be witnesses to what God has done in our lives. And so just to do that. And so that's going to look a lot different. But it also means don't fake it. Like, don't feel like you need to come up with some spiel or need to do something that's 3 steps removed. It's really the people who are in your circle, share it with them. I think if everybody does that, if you're faithful, back to my bad picture, with what's in front of you, big things will happen.
Yeah.
But be faithful to share with the people who are in your circle and find ways to do it well and be authentic and celebrate it when it happens.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, thanks for coming.
Oh, is that? Oh, were you done
That
already?
was it. You did great.
Well, if Amy and her mom are still watching right now,
I'm
thank
sure
y'all
Amy and her mom and everyone else who is watching it have enjoyed it as well.
Well, so appreciate what you're doing here. I think sharing people's stories is a powerful way to make faith real for people. And so my podcast, throw it out because it's pretty boring, but the other ones...
It is not at all.
But the other ones are pretty awesome. And so just encouraging, if someone's made it this far in my story, go listen to the other stories.
Yeah.
I love what God does through his people, and you're capturing some of that, which is so cool to see.
Yeah.
So thank you for letting me be a little part of this.
Well, yes, of course.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mission Control. If you're interested in learning more about Launch 10X and the different ways to get involved in what God is doing here at First Baptist Melbourne, a great place to start would be visiting our website, launchme.church.